The battlefield was a symphony of chaos. Lasers zipped through the air like electric snakes, and explosions turned the distant horizon into a dance of fire and smoke. Kai's boots hit the ground with the thud of a soldier, his cybernetic enhancements making each stride a precise and calculated move. His eyes, augmented for the kill, locked onto his targets, focusing through the haze of battle. His rifle, a sleek piece of high-tech engineering, moved in perfect sync with his body. Each shot landed with deadly accuracy. Enemy soldiers, human, or at least what they once were, fell in droves, their bodies crumpling under the relentless assault. Kai didn't feel a thing. He didn't need to. His mind, sharpened by years of combat and cybernetic reprogramming, operated on autopilot. The mission was simple: clear the enemy forces, secure the perimeter, and move to the extraction point. He'd done it 1,000 times before. But this time, something was different. As his gun hummed with another discharge, Kai felt a strange tug at the back of his mind. A flicker. A flash of something that shouldn't be there. His grip on the rifle tightened, and for a moment, everything around him blurred into insignificance. The blaring alarms, the distant screams, the metallic scent of burning flesh, they all faded into a soft static hum. It was a memory. His memory. But it didn't belong to the soldier he had become. In a moment of stunned silence, the battlefield vanished entirely. He was no longer on the front lines. He was standing in a kitchen, of all places, in front of a stove. A younger version of himself, dressed in an old, worn-out t-shirt, was fidgeting with a spoon. The memory was fractured, jumbled, but vivid. He could feel the heat of the stove on his face. He could almost taste the burnt edges of whatever he had been trying to cook. "God, I'm hopeless," the younger Kai muttered, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. But before he could process more, the battlefield returned, crashing back into his senses like a tsunami. The sounds of war and the sharp smell of ozone filled his nose. His rifle was still in his hands. The mission was still ongoing. His enemies were still out there, and they weren't going to wait for him to piece together his fractured thoughts. But the memory lingered, like a ghost. It was just one moment, brief, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Yet it stuck with him, like a needle pricking at the back of his mind. The mission was over faster than expected. Enemy forces had been neutralized, and the ground was secured. The unit gathered, a mix of men and women, augmented and unaugmented, hardened by years of war. Kai stood among them, his thoughts swirling. The faint echo of that memory still hummed in his head, and the more he tried to push it away, the clearer it became. It wasn't a mistake. That kitchen, that younger version of himself, it felt real. Too real. "Good job out there, Kai," said Captain Mara, her voice cutting through the static in his mind. She was always pragmatic, always focused on the mission. Her glowing eyes, augmented just like his, scanned the horizon. But she noticed his silence. "You all right? You're looking a bit off." Kai didn't answer right away. His gaze was distant, unfocused, lost in that fleeting moment he couldn't explain. Mara's question pulled him back into the present. "Yeah, fine," he muttered, the words coming out mechanically. "Just tired." Mara didn't seem convinced, but she didn't press him. She nodded, turning to the rest of the unit. "All right, let's get to the extraction point. We're done here." As they moved out, Kai lagged behind. The others didn't notice, their minds already back on the mission, already preparing for the next fight. But Kai couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That flash of a memory, it wasn't just a glitch. It was something more. Something hidden. And if that was true, it meant everything he had been told about who he was, what he was, might have been a lie. Back at base, the atmosphere was a little too sterile, a little too clean. The hum of technology filled the air, the soft whirring of machines and the tapping of keyboards as technicians worked on maintaining the endless flow of data. Kai stood at the edge of the operations room, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, his mind a million miles away. Dr. Sophia Lynn found him there. She was one of the few people in the facility who didn't look at him like he was just another weapon in their arsenal. She'd always treated him like a person, a rarity in a place where soldiers like him were more machine than human. "You're not fooling anyone, Kai," she said, her voice light but with an edge of concern. "I can see it in your eyes. What's going on?" Kai didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure how to explain what he had seen. "I had a memory," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "A real one. Not one of those implanted ones. This one was mine." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "A memory?" She studied him closely, as though trying to decipher his cryptic words. "What kind of memory?" Kai exhaled sharply, his mind still trying to piece it together. "I was standing in a kitchen, trying to cook something. It was me. I could feel it. I don't know." Sophia's expression shifted, and for the first time, Kai saw something in her eyes, something he hadn't expected. Pity. Or maybe it was something deeper. "That's impossible," she said slowly. "You were engineered. Your memories, your past, they were erased." Kai turned to face her fully now. "What do you mean, erased?" Sophia hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There's something you don't know about yourself. Something important. And I think it's time you found out." Kai's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Sophia looked around, making sure no one else could hear. "I've been working on something big. I've discovered that your memories, the ones you've been living with, they weren't always yours. They were programmed into you. You're not the person you think you are." Kai blinked. His mind raced to catch up, but it couldn't. "You're saying I'm not me?" Sophia's eyes softened. "Not entirely." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of their implications. Kai's world, already built on a foundation of falsehoods and manipulation, was crumbling around him. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. How many times had he told himself that his past didn't matter? That he was here, now, and that was enough? But now, confronted with this new truth, he felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Sophia took a deep breath, clearly steeling herself. "There's a place. A lab. Hidden deep within the system. It's where they stored your original memories, the ones you had before all of this. If you want answers, you'll have to go there. It's the only way to find out who you really are." Kai looked at her, unsure of what to say. His heart raced, his mind teetering between disbelief and something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. "You've been lied to," Sophia continued. "Your memories, your real memories, they're locked away. And you have to retrieve them." The mission had changed. No longer was he just a soldier carrying out orders. He was a man on the verge of rediscovering himself. "What's it going to cost me?" Kai asked. Sophia met his gaze, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Everything. But you won't be alone. I'll help you." Kai couldn't ignore the weight of Sophia's words. Every fiber of his being screamed to dismiss it, to reject the idea that his entire life, his memories, his identity, was nothing but a fabrication. But deep down, beneath the layers of his soldier's training, something gnawed at him. The memory, the one where he stood in that kitchen, fumbling with a spoon and burning whatever he was cooking, kept resurfacing, clearer now. It was him. It had to be him. Sophia was already moving toward the elevator, her figure a blur in the dim lights of the base. "Come on, Kai. We don't have much time." Kai didn't follow her immediately. He stayed there for a moment, staring at the place where he'd been standing, wondering just how much of his past was real. The question was no longer just about who the enemy was or how to defeat them. It was about who he was before any of this, before the augmentations, the cybernetic modifications, the endless training, are you coming? Sophia's voice sliced through his reverie, pulling him back to the present. Kai nodded and moved to join her. His feet felt heavy, as though each step he took was sinking him deeper into a fog of uncertainty. This wasn't just another mission. This wasn't about pulling the trigger or following orders. This was about discovering the core of who he had been, and what he had lost. If Sophia was right, if his memories had been stolen from him, then everything he knew could be a lie. The elevator doors closed, and they descended in silence. Sophia didn't speak at first, but Kai could feel her eyes on him, as though she was waiting for him to say something. To react. "Do you really think this is worth it?" he asked quietly, staring at the flickering lights as they moved downward. "You're asking me to dig into something that might destroy everything I thought I knew about myself." Sophia didn't flinch. "You can't live a lie forever, Kai. And it's not just about you. There are others out there, others who were manipulated the same way you were. If you can find the truth, maybe you can help them too." Kai's mind replayed the battle from earlier, the way he had moved through it with deadly precision. It was all so automatic, so effortless. But what if he had been trained to be this way? What if none of it had ever been his choice? The elevator gave a soft ding, signaling their arrival at the lowest level of the base. The doors slid open, revealing a dark, quiet hallway. At the end of it was a door, sealed tight with an imposing, old-fashioned lock that didn't match the sleek technology of the rest of the facility. "This is it," Sophia said, her voice softer now. "Behind that door, you'll find what you're looking for." Kai's heart pounded in his chest. Every instinct in him told him to turn back. To stay with what was familiar. But the memory of the kitchen haunted him. The image of his younger self, innocent, untainted by the life he now led, was like a thread he couldn't ignore. He had to know who he was before this. He approached the door, and Sophia handed him a small device, a keycard of sorts. As soon as it slid into the slot, the lock disengaged with a loud click. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, rows of servers hummed quietly, their blinking lights casting an eerie glow on the walls. But in the middle of the room was a console, and on that console, a screen that flickered to life the moment they entered. "This is it," Sophia whispered, moving to the console. "I've bypassed most of the security, but the real challenge is retrieving your memories from the main server. I'll need you to keep watch while I work. They'll come for us." Kai nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. He was standing in the place where the pieces of his past were locked away, waiting to be unlocked. The hum of the servers was almost calming, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo in his chest. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, something, was watching them. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia asked again, glancing up at him. "Once we start this, there's no going back." "I'm sure," Kai said, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "I have to know. I have to know who I was." Sophia's fingers flew over the console, typing furiously as the screen shifted through layers of security protocols. The room was eerily quiet, save for the sound of her rapid typing and the occasional low beep from the computer. Kai stood by the door, keeping an eye on the hallway, his senses heightened. Every creak of the old building, every flicker of the lights, set his nerves on edge. It wasn't long before a low hum filled the air, growing louder. A few seconds later, a group of armed soldiers appeared at the end of the hall, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. Kai's instincts kicked in, and he moved to the side of the door, pulling his weapon from its holster. But Sophia was already ahead of him, her hands flying over the console again, the screen flashing rapidly as she bypassed the last of the security. "Almost there," she muttered under her breath. Kai kept his eyes locked on the soldiers. They were getting closer. His heart was pounding in his ears now, adrenaline flooding his system. "Move faster," he barked. "I'm doing the best I can," Sophia shot back, her voice tinged with panic now. Kai could hear the soldiers' voices now, low murmurs as they approached the door. There was no time to waste. With one last, desperate glance at Sophia, he turned and sprinted toward the hallway, slamming his back into the wall just as the door to the server room opened. The soldiers were just around the corner now. There was no way to avoid them. Kai's mind whirred, calculating the best course of action. He didn't want to kill anyone, he never did, but he had no choice. As the soldiers rounded the corner, Kai dove forward, using his momentum to knock the first one off his feet. He quickly disarmed the second soldier, sending him crashing to the ground with a swift blow. The third soldier hesitated for only a second before aiming his weapon at Kai. Kai's enhanced reflexes kicked in. He ducked just in time, and the soldier's shot missed. In the same motion, Kai grabbed the soldier's arm, twisting it violently, causing the weapon to fall from his grasp. Within seconds, the soldier was incapacitated. The hallway was silent once more, save for the sound of heavy breathing. Kai stood over the fallen soldiers, his heart racing. But there was no time to linger. He turned back to the server room. "Go," he shouted to Sophia. She looked up from the console, eyes wide. The data was coming through now, his memories were being pulled from the server. The screen flickered again, but it held. She was getting close. As the last soldiers were being dealt with outside, the door to the server room hissed shut behind them, locking securely. The system was complete, the memories began to flood in. Kai's head throbbed as the images and feelings poured in, like a dam breaking open. He was younger. A different version of himself, smiling, happy, full of life. He saw the kitchen again, the same kitchen from the earlier memory, but now it was fuller. He could see the face of a woman standing in the background. A mother? A sister? He wasn't sure, but there was warmth in her eyes. He could feel the heat of the stove on his skin. He could taste the disaster of whatever he had been cooking. But then the images shifted, faster now, chaotic. His hand was shaking as he looked at a laboratory, rows of machines, instruments he didn't recognize. His older self was there, guiding a team of researchers. And then, the darkness came. A flash of pain. A body on an operating table. His body, his transformation. The images were blurry at first, disjointed, but they began to make sense. He had been part of an experiment. A soldier, but also a scientist. He had created this. He had created himself. The screen flickered again. The last image was of him, standing alone in a barren field, looking out over a horizon filled with smoke and ruins. The world he had known was gone, destroyed by the very program he had helped build. His memories, the truth of who he had been, were now clear. Sophia stood by, watching him as he processed everything. His past. His future. His choices. "You're not just a soldier, Kai," she said softly. "You're much more than that." But Kai wasn't listening. His mind was already racing, the pieces of his life falling into place. He had a purpose. He knew now what he had to do. There was no going back. Kai's head throbbed with a dull ache as the flood of images from his past continued to press against his mind. It wasn't just memories, it was his entire existence being rewritten, reconstructed, torn apart and stitched back together in a way that felt almost too much to bear. Each image was a jagged puzzle piece, and every new revelation only seemed to raise more questions. The kitchen. The lab. The operating table. His hand trembling as he stood in that sterile room. But there was something more, something darker, his own face, twisted by anguish as he watched the program he had created spread across the world. The screen flickered again, and the images stopped, replaced by a solid image of his younger self, smiling, carefree, standing in front of a large house, waving. The memory of that person, so innocent and untouched by the world he now inhabited, hung in front of him like a ghost. Kai reached out, as if trying to touch it, but the image dissolved into static before his fingers could make contact. "You all right?" Sophia's voice cut through the cloud of confusion that had overtaken him. Kai blinked, shaking his head to clear the fog in his mind. It was all too much. His memories had been stolen, but now they were flooding back, raw, unfiltered, and far more complicated than he had expected. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't know who he was. The soldier? The scientist? The man standing here in front of Sophia, still unsure of his place in the world. "Yeah," he said hoarsely, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. "I think I'm all right." He turned back to the console, watching as Sophia worked quickly to extract the last of the data. Her fingers danced over the keys with mechanical precision, but even she couldn't hide the flicker of concern in her eyes. Kai could see it, even now, with everything that was unfolding. She was nervous. She knew they weren't supposed to be here, and the longer they stayed, the more likely it was that someone would find them. The base wasn't just filled with machines, it was crawling with people, and not all of them were as trusting as she was. "Almost there," Sophia muttered, her voice tight. Kai stood guard, every muscle in his body tense, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. His mind was still racing. There was too much to process, too much to comprehend. The flashes of his past, the good and the bad, the parts he had forgotten and the ones he wished he could forget, had created a chasm inside him. It was as though he had been split into two people. The soldier, the killer, and the man who had once lived a quiet life, perhaps even loved. That person didn't fit in this world of combat, of war. But he didn't have time for introspection. The door behind them was creaking open again, a slow, ominous sound that made his blood run cold. "They're here," he said flatly. Sophia's eyes darted to the screen. The download was almost complete. Her fingers froze over the keys for a heartbeat, and then she resumed typing at a furious pace. "We just need a few more seconds," but it was too late. A squad of soldiers stormed into the room, their heavy boots echoing across the floor. They weren't just any soldiers, they were special. Augmented, like Kai, and designed for one thing: taking down anyone who stood in the way of their mission. "Step away from the console," a gruff voice ordered. Kai's hand tightened around the grip of his weapon. He wasn't about to let them take him again, not when he was so close to the truth. He wasn't the same person they had created anymore. He had his memories, his past, and his purpose. He wasn't just a tool. They had made a mistake, and now they were going to pay for it. "I suggest you listen to him, Kai," Sophia said, her voice sharp with urgency. "We don't have much time." But Kai didn't hesitate. His body was already moving, his instincts taking over as the soldiers began to advance. He darted to the side, rolling across the floor and coming up behind a nearby column for cover. He wasn't going to just give up without a fight. The first soldier fired. Kai heard the whoosh of the projectile tearing through the air and instinctively dove forward, narrowly avoiding the blast. His enhanced reflexes kicked in, and he swung his weapon up, taking out the first soldier in a single, fluid motion. But there were more. Always more, Sophia screamed. Kai looked up to see her scrambling to finish the download, her eyes wild with fear. She was exposed. If he didn't act fast, they would both be dead. Without thinking, Kai sprinted toward the console, using his enhanced speed to close the gap in seconds. He slid into position, taking down another soldier with a clean shot to the chest. The remaining soldiers hesitated for just a moment, unsure of how to proceed. They were used to the soldiers they fought alongside, the ones who followed orders without question, but they weren't used to facing someone like Kai. "Go!" Kai shouted at Sophia, pulling her behind the console and away from the chaos. "Finish it." The final soldier advanced, weapon raised. His face was a mask of determination, but Kai could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He knew the danger. He knew this was no ordinary soldier standing before him. But he wasn't going to back down. He raised his rifle, aiming for Kai's head, but Kai was faster. He ducked low, sweeping the soldier's legs out from under him with a calculated move, and in a blink, had his weapon aimed at the soldier's chest. It was over. The soldier collapsed in a heap, stunned but alive, done. Sophia's voice rang out in triumph. The last of the data was downloaded. The truth was now in their hands. Kai barely had a moment to register the relief before he heard the telltale sound of reinforcements. A backup squad, likely alerted by the initial breach, was en route. They didn't have much time. "Let's go," Kai said, urgency in his tone. He didn't wait for a response. They had to move. The two of them ran, leaving the destroyed server room behind. Kai could hear the sound of boots thundering in pursuit, growing louder with each passing second. They had no time to waste. The base's security system was already starting to lock down, and the countdown was ticking. They had to get out before the whole facility was sealed tight. Sophia led the way, moving with practiced precision through the halls of the base. Kai followed close behind, his senses alert, his mind sharp despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Every step felt like a race against time, a desperate sprint to escape the cage they had unknowingly built around themselves. The hallway ahead opened into a large chamber. At the far end, the emergency exit was visible, but it was guarded by more soldiers, augmented just like the ones they had fought earlier. Kai didn't hesitate. He was done playing by the rules. He moved swiftly, his rifle raised, taking down two guards before they even had time to react. The rest of the soldiers scrambled for cover, but Kai was already on them. His movements were fluid, instinctual, as if the training he had received all those years ago had been burned into his very bones. Sophia was right beside him, dodging the gunfire and reaching the door with him. They were almost there. Almost free, but just as they reached the door, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Stop right there, Kai." It was Captain Mara. Kai's heart sank. He didn't want to fight her. He didn't want to fight anyone anymore. But there was no choice now. Not if he wanted to survive. Not if he wanted to uncover the truth. Sophia's hand was on the door handle, her eyes wide with fear. "Go," she urged him, without looking back. Kai slammed his shoulder into the door, sending it flying open. The two of them ran into the night, the fresh air filling their lungs as they sprinted toward freedom. The truth was out there now, and nothing would stop him from finding it.